Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Gunman opens fire at a school in central Russia, killing at least 15 people and injuring 24. Italy's far right on course to win election. Plus, pound hits a record low against the dollar as markets react to the UK's biggest tax cuts in 50 years. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. We begin in Russia, where a gunman has opened fire at a school, killing at least 15 people and injuring 24 others. The victims include 11 children at the school of about 8,000 pupils in the city of Izhevsk. The gunman killed himself at the scene and was a former student of the school. Videos posted online appear to show panic inside the building where the shooting took place, with children and adults running along corridors. Other footage shows blood on a classroom floor and a bullet hole in a window, with children crouching down underneath desks. Some updates now from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russians in the Siberian town of Tara this morning bid farewell to loved ones that have been called up to fight in Ukraine. Still photographs showed moments of emotion as young men boarded a bus outside an army recruitment center and were waved off. President Vladimir Putin last week ordered Russia's first military mobilization since World War II to enlist 300,000 additional troops. In Russia, the move has prompted a rush towards borders as young men attempt to flee to evade the draft. The call-up has also sparked protests in major Russian cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, resulting in hundreds of arrests. Meanwhile, residents of Melitopol in Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia region voted today in a referendum on joining Russia. Melitopol has been under the control of Russian forces since the early month of the conflict in Ukraine. 4 Ukraine regions controlled by Russia and pro-Moscow forces have been holding referendums on joining Russia in votes widely condemned by the West as illegitimate and a precursor to illegal annexation. The votes in the provinces of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia were hastily organized after Ukraine recaptured large parts of the northeast in a counter-offensive. The Duma, Russia's lower house of parliament, may debate bills incorporating the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine into Russia on September the 29th. And speaking of Zaporizhzhia, UN atomic watchdog chief Rafael Grossi says he's ready to hold talks in Ukraine and Russia this week on setting up a protection zone at the region's nuclear power plant in Ukraine. He says as such a zone is urgently needed to prevent an atomic disaster. In early September, Grossi was among the team of UN experts that visited Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia atomic plant complex to assess the risk of a radiation disaster.
If something happens there, we will not have a natural catastrophe to blame for. We will just have our own inaction because we knew what needed to be done. And there is a plan on the table to do it. Last week, I had an opportunity to start consultations with Ukraine and with the Russian Federation on the urgent establishment of a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is possible. This must be done, and I am ready to continue these consultations in both countries this week so that we can protect this plant. As the Secretary General has said, this war must stop. But before that happens, we must, and here is where the IAEA comes to play, we must make everything in our power to prevent a nuclear accident that would add tragedy to the suffering. From the beginning of this war, I have been in Ukraine several times, and the missions of the IAEA as well. Recently, as it was reminded to us a minute ago, we were at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. A nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, which is under fire. Incredible to believe, but true. In front of this reality, we need to act.
And the European Union has denounced a decision by Serbia to enter into regular consultations with Russia on foreign policy issues, warning the move is raising serious questions about the country's bid to gain EU membership. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Serbian counterpart Nikola Selakovic signed a document dubbed Plan on Consultations on Friday last week. Selakovic said the plan envisages consultations on bilateral and multilateral activities and that there is nothing on security policies in it. Although Serbia has condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the United Nations, it refused to join sanctions against Moscow.
Just a few days ago, Russia announced the path of a further escalation and confrontation by this so-called partial mobilization and illegal referenda about annexing parts of Ukrainian territory. So if in these circumstances we are seeing that the Foreign Ministry of Serbia is agreeing on consultations, regular consultations with the Foreign Ministry of a country which is committing all these acts, that it's a very clear sign about their intention to strengthen their ties, to further strengthening the relations between Serbia and Russia. And this is raising serious questions. The European Union was very clear with our partner countries, especially with countries which are in the EU accession process, such as candidate country Serbia, that relations with Russia under current circumstances cannot be as business as usual with this regime which is committing so many crimes and so many atrocities. And we are taking this very seriously and we are following this up.
And to other stories now, away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, far-right leader Giorgia Meloni has claimed victory in Italy's election and is on course to become the country's first female prime minister. Ms. Meloni is widely expected to form Italy's most right-wing government since World War II. Well, that will alarm much of Europe, as Italy is the EU's third biggest economy. However, speaking after the vote, Ms. Meloni said her Brothers of Italy party would govern for everyone and would not betray people's trust. She's set to win 26% of the vote based on provincial results, ahead of her closest rival, Enrico Letta, from the centre-left. Mr. Letta told reporters earlier today that the far-right's victory is a sad day for Italy and Europe, but his party would provide a strong opposition. And for political analyst Davide Angelucci, results of the Italian general election could be worrying for government stability. According to him, while Ms. Meloni had reason to celebrate her party's success, there's the potential for government instability. With results counted in more than 97% of polling stations, the Brothers of Italy led with more than 26% over the vote, up from just 4% in the last national election in 2018, supplanting the League as the driving force on the right. The League took only around 9%, down from more than 17% 4 years ago. But despite the relatively low score, leader Matteo Salvini said he would stay on as party leader.
She has good reasons to be happy, of course, because the party was so successful, 26% of the votes, which is a huge result, actually the greatest result of a radical right party in Europe. But at the same time, she has some good news to be worried about the stability of her government, new government. And this is due to the fact that the other partners of the coalition did not so well. This is true particularly for the League, going below 10% means that this probably will open fractures within the party and fractures within different factions of the party. And this might result even in a crisis of the League and a crisis of the leadership of the party right now. Based on our data, we know that the party was somehow transversal in getting supports from different age cohorts and most relevantly, different gender, which is something unexpected. In a sense, one would have expected that being a woman, she could mobilize women more than men, something that it's not in the data. So actually, we observed that the support among males is higher compared to the one that we found among women, which is interesting and something that should be analyzed more in detail.
And away from Italy, over to Britain, the pound has fallen to a record low against the dollar as markets react to the country's biggest tax cuts in 50 years. Sterling fell close to $1.03 earlier today before regaining some ground to stand at $1.08. Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng has promised more tax cuts on top of a £4 billion package he announced on Friday amid expectations borrowing will surge. The cost of UK government's borrowing climbed and markets speculated about an emergency interest rate rise. Some economists predict the Bank of England may call an emergency meeting as soon as this week to raise rates to help stem a fall in the pound and calm high inflation. If so, it would come less than a week after the bank lifted interest rates by half a percentage point to 2.25% and before its next official meeting on the 3rd of November. Well, on the streets of London, opinions on Britain's economic future are mixed as the pound slided to an all-time low against the dollar before recovering. Sterling volatility surged today to its highest since the fallout from the Brexit referendum in mid-2016, after the British government's fiscal plan alarmed investors and sent the pound to a record low against the dollar.
About its impact on the public finances, but what I do know is it's clearly just aimed at supporting Tory donors. I mean, it's robbing from the poorest in society and just giving the money to the richest. It's complete nonsense. And looking at the way the pound has been going today, it's going to end up in a complete catastrophe.
Well, I've been here 4 weeks, so the change in exchange rate is around about 5%, so I get 5% more. Enables me to buy another pint.
Well, the pound sterling has fallen so much against US dollar. I think that's what is the impact that we see, that the tax cut is reasonable or not, and we are disappointed about. No, I mean how the world reacts to it is disappointed about the move or have no confidence in British economy. So my impression is negative somehow overall. Yeah.
I think it's obvious that there's some sort of recession coming, right? If it's not already here, we just have to work through it. I think arguably you have to keep spending to try and bring it back, but it's difficult to see. I mean, business is still there, right? The work's still happening. Everyone's still recovering from COVID, spending the money they didn't spend. So the work's still there. People are just being more frugal and a bit more considerate. So they want things cheaper, certainly in the business anyway. But it's still happening. You know, I don't think it's going to be huge. It depends on how long it lasts. You know, I think if we can get through Christmas and Q1, it might be all right. Who knows?
Well, as the pound plunged to a record low against the dollar and British bonds sunk, international tourists visiting London struck up a more upbeat tone.
I do. I think that influences people a lot, especially as we're looking at a recession, a worldwide recession. But people want to travel. They and the United Kingdom is a wonderful place to come. So I think more people are going to be influenced to travel to Britain. Yeah, as you're telling me this, I'm thinking, oh, what does that mean for me now? And some of the fun things, I was just at Covent Garden and walking along the shops there and deliberately not going in some places. Maybe I'll go back.
Oh, I think they would. Yeah, that's a big plus. It's a big difference. When you get more bang for your buck, it makes people want to travel more. And that's the thing, you know. Like if you go to America, a place like that, it's a lot dearer. Like you come to England now, it's crashed. I think you'll find people will, you know, want to travel more over here.
Yeah, of course, because like I checked the currency, like the exchange rate was like extremely low compared to the time back then, and yeah, of course, like during this time you can spend money on purchasing things because it's a good time to do it because we're not earning, you know, pounds, so it's a good timing to do that. Yeah.
It's hard to say. We're facing the same type of economic crisis in Canada, where money's not going as far with COVID and the recovery and that sort of thing. So folks are very closely guarding what they're spending their money on. So whether or not the pound being weaker against the Canadian dollar will prompt more people to come, I really don't know. I hope so, because I think everybody should come here and see what the UK, especially London, has to offer. But whether they do or not, it will remain to be seen, I suppose.
Meanwhile, Britain's opposition Labour Party says it would go after a responsible fiscal policy that provides funds for public services, criticising the Conservative government for gambling with the economy.
Sterling is down. That means higher prices as the costs of imports rise. The cost of government borrowing is up. That means more taxpayers' money will go into paying the interest on our government debt. And in turn, that means the cost of borrowing for working people will now go up too, with higher mortgage repayments for families. It's becoming clearer by the day. Labour is the party of economic responsibility and the party of social justice. Conference, it's time for a government that is on your side, and that government is a Labour government. That new system, it's not what anyone voted for. It's putting our economy in danger, and Conference, Labour will fight it every step of the way. Conference, I will be a responsible Chancellor. I will be Britain's first Green Chancellor. On day one as Chancellor, I will write to the Low Pay Commission with a simple instruction: that the minimum wage will be set at a level that reflects the real cost of living.
When we return in just a moment, we'll have more on Britain's economy. Plus, 5 rescuers dead as Typhoon Noru hit the Philippines. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. As we said earlier, the pound has fallen to a record low against the dollar as markets react to the UK's biggest tax cuts in 50 years. Sterling fell close to $1.03 earlier today before regaining some ground to stand at $1.08. For more on this, we have joining us on the program international financial analyst Opeoluwa Dapo Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we saw the British pound crash to an all-time low against the dollar today before recovering slightly. Speak to us about the economic implications of this. What does the weaker pound mean, especially for prices in the country?
I mean, basically what it has done is obviously showed that we're going to pay more for imports, and obviously investors are already selling risky assets in the UK, so it's going to affect different assets in the UK, and obviously we're going to feel it in house prices as well. It has taken away, the pound is obviously showing a vote of no confidence based on the position of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What it obviously means is American tourists and people coming in from America obviously can shop easier in the country. But usually as a Nigerian, when you leave the country, they advise you, when you go, they tell you to hedge against inflation or hedge against your currency depreciation with the dollar. I think that rule applies to every other country right now. We've seen how the dollar has done what it does best in economic downturns, how other currencies are suffering. We've seen the Swiss franc 7% down, the yen obviously 15-year low against the dollar. Right now in England, the pound is, a few minutes ago, it was about 50-year low against the dollar. I mean, there was a point in time where the dollar was about where a pound was almost equal to the dollar. So although the markets have recovered, as at the time of as at maybe 1 hour ago, the market still came down because the Bank of England obviously has yet to is not going to bring up an emergency rise. But on the bigger perspective, it's quite demoralizing for the economy because the British economy is still recovering from the impacts of Brexit and the impacts of the pandemic, and then obviously the energy triggered crisis from the Russia-Ukraine impasse. So I think right now it's quite risky to go on with such lofty and heavy proposal, a proposal that obviously it has put more pressure on public finances, more borrowing, and obviously more borrowing would mean that the country is going to actually pay more in terms of interest. So who's going to make the repayments? It was a mini budget. It also gave so much away, and obviously, like other economics have said, he's not only betting, he's not only gambling, he's betting away the house as well. So it was quite risky, and obviously there are talks about the impact of this will have on the British economy in the short term. Are we in a recession? Bank of England says possibly we are, and then we will know more about that in a few months' time. But it's not looking good. We've probably, if we were an amber, we've probably moved to red right now in the global economy.
The fall in the value of the pound has led to predictions in some quarters that the Bank of England will raise interest rates sharply. Do you predict this happening as well?
Oh, certainly. I mean, that's the position of monetary policy. The position of monetary policy is to also checkmate, or to basically checkmate fiscal exuberance, if I put it that way. Because if you look at it, you've made a projection of about 2.5% annual growth. Investors and economists are not really convinced you can do that, especially as what we are going through. Well, at double-digit inflation. Remember, 2 years ago, inflation in the UK was about 0%, and now you're about 10%. So right now is not the time to be trying to being adventurous. So obviously the Bank of England obviously has the prerogative to fact check or to checkmate what has happened, and obviously they're going to do that with aggressive monetary policy, which will obviously increase interest rates, and interest rates obviously will show in mortgage rates, and obviously that brings prices down of houses, and obviously it's not very looking good for investors. You see how the economic markets have reacted. Everybody's now waiting on the monetary policy to react, and there were talks about an emergency rise, but as of 20 minutes ago, the Bank of England has responded that they will meet in November rather than any emergency rise, to just see how they can see. They want to just see how the market absorbs this information that has happened on Friday. Let's not try and be reactionary and or make any knee-jerk decisions. But we're expecting obviously before this happened, there were talks about increasing interest rates because of the spiraling inflation. But this obviously has given every incentive for this to happen. There has to be some sort of aggressive interest rate hike, because, like I said, when the federal government or when the Tories, when they accelerate, the monetary policy and the Central Bank of England has to decelerate or has to put a brake to it. So I think that's where they do some sort of financial or economic checks and balances in the economy.
Does this collapse show investors' lack of confidence in the UK's economy?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, now, there's nobody that's going to be holding the risky assets. Like I've said earlier, that right now, during economic downturns, generally, people just hold on to cash. And obviously, cash to hold now is the dollar, because obviously you see how the dollar index is going. So right now, there's no incentive for you to hold the British, any sort of UK assets now, because, like I said, in the bigger picture, we've moved away from the impact of, we're still handling the impact of Brexit, because productivity obviously has declined. And that's why you see loosened immigration rules, telling people, the government's bringing in people from different places, trying to increase labor markets and all that, saying that, okay, there are shortages in the gaps in the economy, or there are gaps in the economy. So we've seen the pandemic, because of the large borrowing you used to support businesses, you used to support individuals. in terms of allowances, in terms of universal credits and all them social benefits and packages. You've seen increased borrowing debt. And then obviously now with the energy prices obviously going high, I mean, now annual energy household, based on what the Tories have put, is bringing it down about 2,500 per year. I mean, before it was projected to be around 4,000, 5,000 pounds. So the borrowing that is going to fill the gap, obviously, is going to, we have put pressure on the British, what do I call it, public finances. And so there are question marks on if this is the right time to be this aggressive. And obviously the markets are showing their behavior. And then now you're looking at bonds. And the UK market is behaving like an emerging market. Obviously, short-term bonds are not really profitable, or really they're not showing any signs. They're very, very risky. So people are looking at the longer-term bonds. And what we're trying to see is how maybe the yields will cover, maybe they will invert, and then it gives you a more it gives you a better picture of the economy in the next few months.
All right, so in the next couple of days, what do you expect? How do you expect the Bank of England to respond?
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, they've said they're going to wait till November. Also, interestingly, the Exchequer of Chancellor is going to also sit in November and tell us how he's going to fund this tax cut you've taken. Because this tax cut you've taken, you're basically taking taxes away from the reduced taxes from the rich. I mean, we're now going back to Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics, where you are saying that you don't want to tax the rich enough so that they can have more money, and when they spend more money, they create more businesses, and it comes down and it floats down to the normal people. But what you've done here is just to put the 5% of the richest people in England on a certain level, and the 95% people are going to be poorer. There was no point taking off the 1% increase, proposed increase in national insurance. There was no point also taking reducing or saying you're not going to increase corporate tax from 19% to 25%, and also talking about abolishing the higher income tax about 45%. There was no point about it, because at the end of the day, we would put more pressure on government borrowing. So what basically the Bank of England has to do is to see how they can react and also stabilize the economy, because now we've seen the impact and we've seen what investors think about this fiscal promise or these economic objectives of the Exchequer, the Chancellor of Exchequer, who has also said that he's not worried about the short term or the financial markets. He's just worried about the medium and the strategic long-term goals of the British economy. Over the years, his rationale is, over the years, we've been talking about cutting and sharing the pie, but right now they want to grow the pie, so they want to grow the economy large enough. But investors are not really certain about it, and we have to do what's best for the British people every single day, and that's where the Bank of England has to come in. And I believe that they would increase interest rates, like other central bankers have been doing that. I mean, I think apart from Turkey, Argentina, and maybe Japan, most central bankers in the world are increasing interest rates, obviously, to fight spiraling and aggressive inflation. So I think that the Bank of England is going to do the right thing, and we just have to wait to see. It's a matter of when and not if.
All right, then, international financial analyst Opeolu Adapo Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me today.
We're still on the economy. The Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says global economic growth is slowing more than was forecast a few months ago in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as energy and inflation crisis risks snowballing into recessions in major economies. According to the OECD, while global growth this year was still expected to at 3.0%, is now predicted too slow, 2.2% in 2023, revised down from a forecast in June of 2.8%. The Paris-based Policy Forum was particularly pessimistic about the outlook in Europe, the most directly exposed economy to the fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine. Global output next year is now projected to be $2.8 trillion lower than the OECD forecast before Russia invaded Ukraine, a loss of income worldwide equivalent in size to the French economy.
We are facing a global and broad-based surge in inflation. The inflationary pressures were already building up during the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic as economies reopened and supply couldn't match the sudden surge in demand. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine brought additional disruptions to commodity markets and pushed prices on those markets up further. Elevated food and energy prices are now spreading more broadly to affect core goods and services across many countries. Households and firms are suffering as costs rise and purchasing power is taking a hit. The war, the burden of high energy and food prices, as well as zero COVID-19 policies in China mean that growth will be lower and inflation will be higher and more persistent. We project global GDP to grow at a modest 3% in 2022 and an even weaker 2.2% in 2023. This is well below the pace of economic growth projected prior to the war and represents around $2.8 trillion US in foregone global output in 2023.
And over in Sudan, travel agencies are helping young Sudanese head to Egypt with the aim of seek a brighter future. These Sudanese can travel there cheaply and hunt for work, while families seek healthcare, education for their children, and a stable life.
At downtown Khartoum's Al Souk Al Arabi, travel agencies helping young Sudanese seek a brighter economic future in Egypt are replacing once packed hardware stores in a corner of the capital's main commercial hub. Egypt, already home to a Sudanese community estimated at 4 million, offers few of the lucrative jobs that Sudanese migrants have traditionally sought in the Gulf. But it's an easier and often more familiar destination.
The country has countless problems. The schedule of universities has many problems. If university usually takes 4 to 5 years, it now takes from 6 to 7 years, depending on what you study. This is one of many problems. Universities won't be able to continue like this because of protests and roadblocks. This is one of the main reasons these people leave Sudan in order to study abroad.
The owner of a Khartoum bus company says as many as 30 buses were taking around 1,500 passengers to Egypt from Sudan daily, which he said was up 50% from last year, despite sharp ticket price increases. According to travel agents and migrants, Sudanese youth often end up working menial jobs in factories, gold mines, or as domestic help, but they have a community to lean on and can earn more than at home.
I decided to come to Egypt because the process have caused everything to become so expensive. If you want to buy bread, you cannot easily go and buy bread. You need to stand in line for 3 or 4 hours. It's very difficult.
There are no publicly available figures to show recent migration trends from Sudan to Egypt, but an Egyptian diplomat said numbers of those traveling had been on the rise since 2019. According to the International Labour Organization, circumstances in Egypt are also difficult, with inflation running at its highest in almost 4 years and almost a quarter of youth unemployed. However, the International Organization for Migration anticipates that more people will consider migration as an option.
Kamala Harris has held a bilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Tokyo. The two are said to have discussed a partnership on Taiwan security issues. Harris, who is set to attend former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's funeral on Tuesday, says Abe's leadership strengthened an enduring friendship between the two nations. Japan will honor Abe with a rare state funeral on Tuesday, a ceremony that has become a flashpoint for public anger over political scandal and deepened opposition to successor Kishida.
And I'm here to lead the delegation to show our respect for Prime Minister Abe. His leadership, as you have said, was an enduring friendship with the United States. His leadership strengthened the relationship between Japan and the United States. And so on behalf of President Biden, I send you our well wishes and condolences. As you have said, the alliance between Japan and the United States is a cornerstone of what we believe is integral to peace stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. And it is something we prioritize because we also believe it is in the best interest of the American people in terms of their security and prosperity, and we do believe the same for the Japanese people.
5 rescue workers in the Philippines have been killed in a typhoon that has left homes flooded and millions without electricity. They were washed away in flash floods while carrying out operations in the district of San Miguel, north of the capital, Manila. The district was among those hit hard by Typhoon Noru, with some residents seen stranded on their roofs. The typhoon caused gusts of up to 240 kilometers per hour on Luzon, where more than half of the country's 110 million population live. Noru first made landfall as a super typhoon, but later weakened at 8:20 p.m. on Sunday. It's expected to leave the Philippines by this evening. Meanwhile, Vietnamese authorities are racing to prepare for Storm Noru before it's forecast to make landfall on Tuesday. Typhoon Noru weakened after passing through the Philippines on Sunday night and is now headed out over the South China Sea towards Vietnam, where authorities are racing to prepare for its arrival late on Tuesday. State media VTV reported the government warned of the threat of Noru, anticipating what it said was one of the biggest typhoons to hit Vietnam in 20 years. Schools have been closed and boat owners were ordered to stay ashore in central provinces, while the government says it's ready to evacuate about 1 million people if necessary. Now, 1 person has been killed in Murcia, southern Spain, and dozens evacuated. Parts of the effects of Tropical Storm Hermine, which has been downgraded to a tropical depression, as it triggered rain and floods in the Mediterranean area. Using bulldozers, rakes and hoses, workers in Murcia locals cleaned up the debris and mud left on the streets today. Spain's National Weather Agency had issued a red alert for the region due to torrential rains. It said heavy rains on Sunday marked a record in the region. The storms also hit other Mediterranean areas like Valencia and Balearic Islands, as well as the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean.
Esto es una rambla, justamente aquí detrás de una rambla que es la que cruza por todas las casas y se ve que al fondo, donde está el puente.
And when we return in just a moment, we meet 88-year-old Bosnian Ibrahim Vlasic, who keeps fit by regularly jumping out of aeroplanes. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. A military display to mark the passing of Queen Elizabeth II today included a 96-gun salute and a parade column through the streets of Ottawa, Canada, as the Queen's mourning ceremonies come to a close. The Canadian Armed Forces fired 96 rounds of blank ammunition at 10-second intervals for roughly 16 minutes to mark the 96 years of the Queen's life. In Toronto, church bells too rang 96 times in honor of Queen Elizabeth II, and City Hall staff held a moment of silence at the Peace Garden commissioned by the Queen in 1984.
As one who had the privilege of a significant relationship with Her Majesty for many years, I can simply say this. She was extremely intelligent, a woman of impeccable judgment, resolute, selfless, witty, very witty, and kind. The role of the monarchy, and in particular, the irreplaceable role played by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for 70 years was absolutely indispensable in our country's hugely impressive achievements and contributions to peace and prosperity and stability at home and around the world. May God bless the Queen, and may God save the King.
Meanwhile, over in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has led a state memorial service for Queen Elizabeth II, saying the Pacific nation has had a deep connection with her. Hundreds watched the state memorial service outdoors on the screen set on the Parliament grounds in Wellington, the national capital, as the closed-door ceremony began with a minute of silence at the Cathedral of St. Paul.
A connection grounded in her first visit in 1953. Today's reading is an extract from The Royal Visit to New Zealand, a souvenir book published following this significant occasion. For most of the time, the Queen and the Duke leaned over the rail on the upper deck, smiling and waving repeatedly and taking photographs of the scene on shore. A Māori party on the wharf sang songs of farewell, and the Gothics band played. But the overall sound was of cheering, swelling up again and again. As the great white ship moved slowly through the channel, crowds ran along Marine Parade, keeping abreast of her, everyone cheering, many weeping, reluctant to give up their waving until the answering white-gloved hand could be seen no longer.
And in Kenya, 3 people have died and scores injured after a 6-story building collapsed in Kiambu's central region of the nation. Rescue efforts are underway and emergency workers have managed to pull a child from the rubble. According to Kiambu County Governor Kimani Wamatangi, several others have also been rescued, but sadly some are feared to have succumbed to their injuries. Building collapses in Kenya have in the past been blamed on poor structural design or sloppy construction. The cause of this collapse is unclear, but the building was under construction when it came down. A suspected leader of the Seleka militia groups in the Central African Republic, Mohamed Said Abdul Kani, has pleaded not guilty to charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the opening of his trial at the International Criminal Court. He is accused of being in charge of a police compound in the capital, Bangui, in 2013, where supporters of the deposed president, Francois Bozize, were brutally tortured.
For 10 horrendous months, the Seleka ruled Bangui. To say they governed would be an abuse of the English language. They ruled by diktat, by fear, by terror. And they targeted individuals that they perceived as being on the other side. Not because they were, not because they were combatants, but simply because they believed they were on the side of former President Bozize. And Mr. Said was in charge of the location that we will zoom in and focus on in the course of this trial, the OCRB. Now, the prosecution alleged that Mr. Said was not a passive spectator, not simply somebody who failed to prevent and repress and punish, but he actively hunted down civilians himself and brought them to the OCRB, knowing exactly what he had planned for them, what nightmare awaited them under his control and custody. With your leave, he was a man of great power. How unfortunate it is for the people of the Central African Republic. How unfortunate it is for Mr. Said that he didn't use that authority, that power, properly and humanely, but instead abused his own people. P3056.
Well, in South Africa, 5 suspects have appeared before a Soweto magistrates court in connection with a mass shooting incident which left about 16 people dead and 8 others injured in July. One of these suspects arrested has been leading the investigating police to others as far-flung as Lesotho. They face a 19-count charge, including murder, attempted murder, and defeating the ends of justice. The case has been adjourned till the 18th of October.
The suspects so far are 2 South Africans and 3 Lesotho nationals. The Orlando Magistrates Court was filled to capacity, with some victims' family members unable to enter to witness proceedings. The magistrate, Anthony Noru, ordered that neither the faces of the 5 suspects nor their legal representatives could be filmed.
Please don't show the faces of them. Nothing should have been done. The lawyers asking for.
Not long after, the State Council requested a 4-week postponement, given what he calls the complexity of the case, as more investigations are still required. Judge Leroux granted a postponement to the 18th of October, and suspects are to remain in custody. Spokesperson for the National Prosecuting Authority, Pindim Jonondwane, gave details of the charges and ongoing investigations.
The suspects before court are charged with 19 counts of murder, including the 16 murders that happened in Nomzamo Tavern, and the 3 other murder cases emanate from other dockets that were combined with the Nomzamo one. We've got about 4 cases from Orlando subs and 2 from Cliptown subs, which are then all combined into one docket to formulate charges that they've appeared for, which is 19 charges of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. I can't remember the exact number, robbery with aggravating circumstances and defeating the ends of justice.
Can you confirm the nationalities of the accused?
2 of the accused are South African nationals and the 3 other are Lesotho nationals. At this stage, we do suspect that it is a syndicate that wanted to control your mining, your abandoned mines, your dumping sites, and the cable theft syndicate. But for now, it's just our suspicion. Investigations, as they progress, will be able to have more answers.
It was here at the Mdlalos's Tavern in Nomzamo Park, Soweto, that AK-47 wielding gunmen opened fire on patrons in the early hours of a Sunday morning in July, killing 16 people and seriously wounding others. This was one incident among 4 that week in South Africa. As investigations continue, a grieving community and family members eagerly await answers. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Finally on the program, on a lighter note, Bosnian Ibrahim Kalashik is living proof that extreme sports are not always a young man's game. At the age of 88, he keeps fit by regularly jumping out of aeroplanes. Kalashik was introduced to the sport more than 70 years ago and has completed over 1,480 jumps while participating in a parachuting competition in the western town of Biak. He said that he exercises daily for 15 minutes and his wife ensures he's careful with his diet. According to him, his biggest wish is to get his own parachute and another one to use for training young jumpers. Well, as the saying goes, age is just a number. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Oyitayo.